When most people think about going to college, they imagine a place where they can finally get to focus on what they actually care about. After years of taking required classes in high school, the expectation is that college will be different. That once you pick a major, everything you learn will start to align with your goals, interests, and future career. But that's what I thought, at least. Going into college as a business administration major, I assumed that the majority of my classes would revolve around business, whether that meant about learning finance, marketing, management, or even the economics of it. My expectations were somewhat met, but they didn't really match the reality. During orientation, when we were signing up for our classes for our first semester, our instructor explained how the course system worked. He told us that for the first 2 years, we would mostly be taking what are called general education classes, also known as GEs. And at the time, I didn't really think anything much of it. It just sounded like another requirement, something everyone had to do. So I kind of just brushed it off without questioning it. But I figured it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But after actually going through multiple semesters with majority of my classes being general education courses, it started to feel draining. So basically, general education classes are essentially courses that every student is required to take, regardless of their major. The idea behind them is that they're supposed to make you a more well-rounded individual by exposing you to a variety of subjects. So instead of focusing only on your field of study, you also take classes in areas like history, science, math, and art. On paper, that sounds reasonable. The concept of being well-rounded and having a broad understanding of different topics is something that most people would agree is valuable. But this issue isn't necessarily the idea itself, it's the way it's implemented and how much of your time it actually takes up. And in my experience, I know this applies to a lot of other students as well. The first 2 years of pursuing your bachelor's degree are heavily dominated by these GE courses. Most semesters, I would have 3 or 4 general education classes and only 1 or 2 classes that were actually related to my major. That means the majority of my time, energy, and focus was being spent on subjects that didn't really connect to what I wanted to do in the future. And over time, that starts to feel less like an opportunity to learn and more like an obligation you're just trying to get through. The disconnect becomes even more obvious when you think about why people go to college in the first place. For most students, college is not just about learning random subjects. It's about preparing for a career. It's about gaining knowledge and skills that will help you in a specific field. And when you choose a major, you're making a decision about the direction you want your life to go in, at least in terms of your career. So when you spend a large portion of your college experience taking classes that don't align with that direction, it can feel like you're not actually making meaningful progress. For example, as a business administration major, I've taken classes like kinesiology, health and well-being, ethnic studies, and art history. And while each of these subjects might have value in general sense, it's hard to see how they directly contribute to my understanding of my major and help me develop skills that I'll use in my career. Sitting in those classes, it's difficult not to question why they're required in the first place. It's not that the information is completely useless, it's that it feels disconnected from my goals. And they can be interesting at times. I'm not saying that they're boring in any sense. I'm just saying that it has nothing to relate to my major. And that feeling becomes even stronger when you consider the level of engagement in these classes. When you're genuinely interested in a subject, it's easier to pay attention, participate, and actually absorb the material. But when you're in a class that you don't care about, it's a completely different experience. You find yourself checking the time, zoning out, and just trying to get through it. And it's not just a personal issue, it's something you can observe in the classroom as a whole. A lot of students are disengaged. They're on their phones or distracted by their computers and doing the bare minimum to pass. And that environment doesn't really encourage meaningful learning. I've even experienced this in classes that I thought I might enjoy. So for example, right now, I'm currently taking an art history class, and I actually like art. I went into this class thinking it might be interesting, something different that I could appreciate. But the way the material is presented, combined with the lack of personal interest in the specific content being taught, makes it really hard to stay engaged. And in some cases, these professors tend to talk in a monotone voice, and it just doesn't seem like they're engaged with the audience as well, because they'll just be reading off a PowerPoint sometimes and just ramble on about a textbook or information on the textbook, and it's not really engaging with the audience. Like at this point, it ends up feeling like something I have to sit through rather than something I want to learn. And when that happens, it reinforces the idea that the issue isn't just the subject itself, but the fact that it's required. Another aspect that doesn't make much sense is how repetitive some of these classes can feel. Many of the topics covered in general education courses are things that we've already learned in high school. Subjects like US history, basic science, and health education are not new concepts, but they require you to retake them again in college, and it's really frustrating. So when you encounter them again in college, it can feel really redundant. Instead of building on new, specialized knowledge, you're revisiting material that you've already been exposed to. And that repetition can make the entire experience feel less valuable. When you start to look at the bigger picture, the issue becomes even more significant. Like a typical bachelor's degree takes about 4 years to complete. But if you really break it down to how that time is spent, a substantial portion of it goes toward fulfilling general education requirements. And if those requirements didn't exist or were significantly reduced, it's not unrealistic to think that a degree could be completed in closer to 2 years. And that's a huge difference. Can you just imagine how much you can accomplish with those extra 2 years? Just shaving off. That's half of your college time just gone, not even focused on general education. And those remaining 2 years can just be focused on what you actually go to college for. And that's investing your time and money into whatever you want to learn. That's a huge difference, not just in terms of time, but in terms of cost as well. And some of that financial burden can go away because you're not even investing that much money if you're going for 2 years. But that's just the way it is. College is very expensive. Between tuition, textbooks, housing, and other expenses, the costs add up way more quickly. So if you're spending additional semesters taking classes that aren't directly related to your major, you're essentially paying for time that could have been used more efficiently. For many students, that translates into more debt or a greater financial burden. Reducing the number of required GE classes could potentially make a higher education more accessible and less financially stressful. But beyond the financial aspect, there's also the concept of opportunity cost. The time spent taking these extra classes is time that could have been used to gain real-world experience, whether that's through internships, part-time jobs, or opportunities related to your field. Those experiences often provide more practical value than a general education course, especially when it comes to preparing for a career. And this could also be things like clubs or organizations at your school that can help excel you in your career that you're interested in pursuing after college. By extending the time it takes to graduate, the current system delays the point at which students can fully enter the workforce and start building their careers. And some people believe that the system would say that being exposed to a variety of subjects helps students develop critical thinking skills, cultural awareness, and a broader perspective on the world. And to some extent, yeah, I think that's true, especially critical thinking, but I think that specific course should be implemented in everyone else's education. That's one of the most important things you have to learn. I learned that in high school, which is different, but I expanded on those ideas in college. But anyways, it is important being knowledgeable in different areas and not being limited to just one field of study. But the question is whether that value justifies the amount of time and money that students are required to invest in it. In reality, most students are not approaching these classes with the goal of becoming more well-rounded. Instead, they're focused on completing the requirements as quickly and efficiently as possible, such as myself. That often leads to a mindset where the goal is simply to pass the class rather than truly learn from it. And I do tend to remember bits and pieces of those kinds of courses in the past, but none of the concepts really stick with me unless the GE is somehow related to my field, which is really unlikely, or if I have general interest in the class itself. When learning becomes secondary to completing requirements, it undermines the purpose of the education itself. One possible solution could be to make general education classes optional rather than mandatory. Students who are genuinely interested in exploring different subjects would still have the opportunity to do so, while those who want to focus entirely on their major could take a more direct path. This approach would give students such as myself more control over their education and allow them to tailor their experience to their own goals and interests. I believe that this would be a more efficient way to go about it. Another approach could be to integrate these concepts into major specific courses. Instead of requiring separate courses, concepts such as communication or critical thinking could be incorporated into courses that are directly related to a student's field. That way, students would still gain a broader perspective, but in a way that feels more relevant and applicable. At the end of the day, the issue with general education classes isn't that they exist, it's that they take up such a large portion of the college experience and are required for everyone, regardless of their goals. Like if you really think about it, think of any general education course that you've taken in the past, and in an alternate reality you didn't have to take that course. You could spend that time focusing on other courses or spend that time doing something else more productive. For many students, such as myself, this creates a sense of inefficiency and frustration as they feel like they're being slowed down rather than supported in their academic journey. Like right now, it just feels such a drag just trying to get all these classes out of the way instead of just focusing on major related courses that actually matter towards my career. From my perspective, college should be more focused on helping students move toward their future as efficiently as possible. And that doesn't mean eliminating all opportunities for broader learning, but it does mean rethinking how those opportunities are structured. This can even be reducing the amount of general education credits you have to take. That would be so helpful for all students because not only are you going to be saving money, but that's less time you're going to be spending on not pointless courses, but courses that don't correlate to your degree, and less time at college in general. Right now, the system feels kind of outdated, especially in a time where information is more accessible than ever, and alternative paths to education are becoming more common. But this is just my perspective based on my own experience. There are definitely people who benefit from general education classes and find value in them, and I am this person myself. But it's not every general education class is going to be like that. It's probably a handful of them. But for me and many others, it often feels like an unnecessary extension of something we've already done before. It feels like time and money that could be better spent focusing on what truly matters to us. But I'm curious on what you guys think. Should these classes still be a core requirement in college? Or is it time to rethink the system entirely? But that's all I wanted to talk about. Later.